What if I told you that hidden beneath the world's most famous museums lies a secret gallery where the most dangerous artworks in history were locked away? Tonight, as you fall asleep, we'll unlock these forbidden chambers and discover why these masterpieces were deemed too powerful, too controversial, or too mysterious for public eyes. Welcome to the Midnight Museum, where sleep stories meet art history, and where you'll learn the darkest secrets of humanity's greatest creators while you drift into peaceful slumber. Tonight's journey will take us through hidden vaults containing works that challenged empires, predicted the future, and some say cursed their creators. By the end of tonight's sleep learning adventure, you'll discover which Renaissance master painted prophecies that came true centuries later, why Napoleon personally ordered the destruction of certain artworks, and the real reason why some paintings can only be viewed in complete darkness. So dim your lights, settle into comfort, and let the gentle rhythm of these forgotten tales guide you into restful sleep as we explore art history's most guarded secrets. This is your invitation to fall asleep with the masters of mystery. Our first tale begins in 1886 Prague, where the night air carried whispers of revolution and the scent of oil paint from countless studios. In a narrow cobblestone alley behind a door marked only with a small bronze raven lived František Kupka, an artist whose name would echo through art history long after his death. But tonight, we're not here for the Kupka you know from textbooks. We're here for the painting he never meant the world to see. A canvas he created during 7 sleepless nights, driven by visions that came to him in dreams so vivid, so terrifying, that he questioned his own sanity. As you settle deeper into your pillow, imagine walking through Prague's gaslit streets, the sound of your footsteps echoing off ancient stone walls. The year is 1886, and the world stands on the precipice of changes no one could imagine. Yet in his small studio, Kupka was painting the future. The canvas measured exactly 33 by 21 inches, dimensions that would later prove significant in ways Kupka never intended. Using pigments he had mixed himself from materials gathered during his travels through the Bavarian forests, he began what he would later call the prophecy of shadows. For our sleep learning journey tonight, let me paint you the scene with words as gentle as a lullaby. Picture the artist's studio, candles flickering against the darkness, casting dancing shadows that seemed almost alive. The air thick with the scent of linseed oil and something else, something indefinable that made visitors feel both drowsy and alert. Kupka worked only between midnight and dawn, claiming the daylight corrupted his vision. Each brushstroke was deliberate, each color choice guided by dreams that visited him like clockwork at 3:17 a.m. every night. These weren't ordinary dreams, mind you. They were visions of a great war that would consume Europe, of strange flying machines that would rain fire from the sky, of a time when art itself would become a weapon As we journey deeper into this sleep story, allow your breathing to slow, your muscles to relax. The tale of the cursed canvas is one that unfolds like a gentle river, carrying you toward peaceful rest while filling your mind with the rich tapestry of art history. The painting itself defied description then, as it does now. Swirling forms that seem to move when viewed peripherally, colors that appeared different depending on the angle of observation, and in the center, a figure that some claimed looked like the viewer's own reflection, but aged by decades of sorrow. Kupka completed the work on November 11th, exactly 32 years before the armistice that would end the Great War. Coincidence? Perhaps. But what happened next would make even the most skeptical observers question the nature of artistic inspiration. The first person to view the completed painting was Kupka's neighbor, an elderly clockmaker named Heinrich Zimmermann. Heinrich was known throughout Prague for his punctuality, his rationality, and his complete disbelief in anything that couldn't be measured with his precision instruments. Yet, after spending merely 10 minutes in front of The Prophecy of Shadows, Heinrich rushed from the studio, claiming he had seen his own death in the swirling paint. 3 days later, Heinrich Zimmermann was found in his workshop, surrounded by hundreds of clocks. All stopped at 3:17 a.m. The cause of death was listed as heart failure, but neighbors reported that for those 3 days, every clock in a 2-block radius had been running 7 minutes fast. This is the kind of mystery that makes art history so fascinating for those seeking sleep, learning adventures. As your eyelids grow heavier, let your mind wander through these corridors of time, where reality blends with the legend, and where every brushstroke carries the weight of destiny. Word of the painting's strange effect spread through Prague's artistic community like ripples in a dark pond. Some claimed it was merely the power of suggestion, that Heinrich's death was coincidental. Others whispered that Kupka had made a pact with forces beyond human understanding. The truth, as often happens in our sleep stories, lies somewhere between skepticism and belief, in that twilight realm where art becomes more than mere pigment on canvas, where creativity touches something eternal and mysterious. Kupka himself seemed increasingly troubled by his creation. He stopped inviting visitors to his studio, worked only by candlelight even during the day, and began covering all his mirrors with black cloth. His journal entries from this period, discovered decades later in a hidden compartment of his easel, speak of the painting that paints itself, and of nights when he would wake to find new details added to the canvas, details he had no memory of creating. The shadows move when I'm not watching, he wrote on November 15th. I fear I have opened a door that should have remained sealed. The brush moves of its own accord, and I am merely the vessel through which darker truths emerge. As you fall asleep tonight, let these images drift through your consciousness like gentle waves. The mysterious studio, the candlelight dancing across an impossible painting, the artist caught between creation and terror. This is how art history comes alive in the quiet hours, when rational thought gives way to deeper understanding. The painting's reputation grew, attracting visitors from across Europe. Artists, collectors, and curiosity seekers made pilgrimages to Prague just to stand before the prophecy of shadows. But Kupka had established strict rules. No one could view the painting for more than 15 minutes. No photographs were permitted, and all visitors had to sign a waiver absolving him of responsibility for any unusual experiences they might encounter. Among the notable visitors was Gustav Klimt, who reportedly spent his allotted 15 minutes in complete silence before declaring that he had seen the face of time itself in the swirling paint. Sarah Bernhardt, the famous actress, claimed the painting whispered to her in 3 different languages, none of which she recognized. And Oscar Wilde, during his exiles in Paris, wrote to a friend that the painting had shown him the only honest mirror in all of Europe. But it was the visit of Archduke Franz Ferdinand that would seal the painting's fate. In the spring of 1914, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne made a secret journey to Prague, specifically to see Kupka's mysterious canvas. What happened during that 15-minute viewing was never officially recorded, but witnesses reported that the Archduke emerged from the studio pale and shaking, muttering something about the price of crowns and blood in the streets of Sarajevo. 2 months later, Franz Ferdinand was assassinated in Sarajevo, plunging Europe into the Great War that Kupka claimed to have foreseen in his midnight visions. This convergence of art and destiny is what makes sleep learning such a powerful tool for understanding history. As your mind relaxes into the rhythm of rest, these connections become clearer, these patterns more visible. The boundaries between dream and reality, between artist and prophet, blur in the most beautiful way. Following the assassination, authorities arrived at Kupka's studio with orders to confiscate the prophecy of shadows, but they found only an empty easel and a note in Kupka's handwriting. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. The painting goes where it wills to those who need its warnings most. The canvas had vanished, leaving behind only the faint outline of its image burned into the wall behind the easel, like a shadow cast by light that had never existed. And so ends our first tale from the Midnight Museum's Forbidden Gallery. As you continue to fall asleep, carry with you the image of that mysterious studio where an artist's dreams became prophecy, where brushstrokes carried the weight of destiny, and where art history reveals its deepest secrets to those who seek them in the quiet hours of the night. Our journey through the hidden art history now takes us to Renaissance Florence, where the scent of fresh bread mingles with the aroma of tempera paint, and where every shadow might conceal a masterpiece lost to time. Here, in the marble halls of the Medici Palace, we discover our second forbidden treasure, a mirror mirror that reflected not faces, but futures. As you sink deeper into comfortable sleep, let your mind wander through the cobblestone streets of 1503 Florence. The city bustles with the energy of creation. Leonardo da Vinci walks these same streets. Michelangelo's chisel rings out from nearby workshops, and in the Medici collection, curator Giuseppe Vitaliani makes a discovery that will haunt art history for centuries. The Medici mirror, as it came to be known in whispered conversations among collectors, was not originally intended as a mirror at all. It began as a silver-backed glass panel, commissioned by Lorenzo the Magnificent as a gift for his daughter's wedding. The artisan chosen for this task was Benedetto Silvano, a master glassmaker whose family had guarded the secrets of Venetian mirror making for 3 generations. But Benedetto was also an alchemist, a student of the ancient arts that blurred the line between science and magic. In creating the Medici mirror, he incorporated techniques learned from manuscripts acquired during the fall of Constantinople, methods that involved silver treated with mercury under specific lunar conditions, and glass ground with powders that medieval texts claimed could capture the essence of time itself. The process, according to Benedetto's encrypted notes, required 49 days of continuous work, beginning always on the new moon and ending as the next full moon reached its peak. The workshop had to be sealed from all natural light, illuminated only by candles made from beeswax mixed with herbs, gathered at midnight from abandoned graveyards. This is the kind of detail that makes sleep learning so enriching. As you rest, your subconscious mind absorbs these intricate historical processes, these glimpses into how artistry intertwined with mysticism in ways our modern world has forgotten. When Benedetto finally unveiled his creation, even the Medici court, accustomed to wonders, fell silent. The mirror was beautiful beyond description, its surface seeming to hold depth beyond the physical, as if one were looking not at a reflection, but through a window into another realm. But it was what people saw in this mirror that earned it a place in our forbidden gallery. Instead of their current faces, viewers claim to see themselves as they would appear years, sometimes decades, in the future. Young courtiers saw themselves with gray hair and lined faces. Children saw themselves as adults, wearing expressions of wisdom or sorrow that hadn't yet touched their lives. Lorenzo's daughter, Clarice, was the first to experience the mirror's strange properties during her wedding preparations. As her ladies-in-waiting gathered around to admire her bridal dress, Clarice looked into the mirror and saw not a young bride, but herself as an elderly woman dressed in the black robes of mourning, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "I see sorrow where there should be joy," she whispered, backing away from the mirror. "I see endings where we celebrate beginnings." The ladies laughed, attributing her vision to pre-wedding nerves. But Clarice's prediction proved accurate. Her husband died in battle just 3 years later, and she spent the remaining 7 years of her life in mourning, never remarrying, exactly as she had seen in Benedetto's impossible mirror. As your sleep deepens, let these images flow through your consciousness, like water through ancient channels. The Medici Palace, candlelit and mysterious, the mirror that showed tomorrow's truths, the young bride who saw her future, written in silver and sorrow. Word of the mirror's properties spread through Florence's artistic community, attracting the attention of the city's most famous residents. Leonardo da Vinci, ever curious about the intersection of art and science, requested a private viewing. He spent 3 hours studying the mirror from every angle, sketching its construction, taking measurements, analyzing the way light played across its surface. What Leonardo saw in his own reflection, he never recorded in any journal that survived. But from that day forward, his self-portraits began to show a haunted quality, as if he carried knowledge too heavy for one man to bear. Some art historians believe it was after viewing the Medici mirror that Leonardo began his obsession with flying machines, as if he had seen a future where men soared through the skies and was determined to make that vision reality. Michelangelo's encounter with the mirror was even more dramatic. The sculptor arrived at the Medici Palace in 1504, just as he was beginning work on his David. Young, confident, at the peak of his artistic powers, Michelangelo approached the mirror expecting to see his reflection crowned with future glory. Instead, he saw himself as an old man, alone in a cluttered workshop, surrounded by unfinished sculptures, his hands gnarled with arthritis, his eyes dim with age and regret. But most disturbing of all in this future reflection, Michelangelo saw himself weeping over a small clay model of a sculpture he had never created, a work that seemed to pulse with life, yet remained forever incomplete. The mirror shows not just time, Michelangelo wrote to his brother, but the weight that time will place upon our shoulders. I have seen the price of artistic ambition, and it is steeper than I ever imagined. This is the power of art history when explored through sleep learning. These tales don't just inform, they transform, allowing you to experience the emotional truth behind historical facts as you rest and restore your mind. The mirror's most famous visitor was Niccolo Machiavelli, who came to the Medici Palace in 1513 after his exile from Florentine politics. What the master of political strategy saw in his reflection changed the course of his writing forever. Witnesses reported that Machiavelli stared into the mirror for nearly an hour, his expression shifting from curiosity to horror to grim acceptance. When he finally stepped away, Machiavelli was heard to mutter, "So, this is how the game ends. Knowledge becomes power, power becomes corruption, and corruption becomes history." That very night, Machiavelli began writing The Prince, his masterwork on political power and its consequences. Some scholars believe that what he saw in the Medici mirror was not his personal future, but the future of political systems themselves, a vision of how his theories would be used by tyrants and dictators for centuries to come. The mirror's influence extended beyond individual revelations. Artists who viewed their future selves began creating works with an urgency previously unknown. Poets wrote about themes decades before they became culturally relevant. Composers incorporated musical phrases that wouldn't be fully understood until much later periods. Florence itself seemed to change, as if the city had glimpsed its own destiny in that silvered surface. Architecture became more ambitious as builders saw the future appreciation for bold design. Merchants made investments in trades that wouldn't flourish for generations. The entire Renaissance seemed to accelerate, as if history itself was eager to catch up with what the mirror had revealed. But like all artifacts in our Midnight Museum's forbidden collection, the Medici mirror carried a price. Those who saw their futures often found themselves trapped by that knowledge, unable to escape the destiny they had witnessed. Free will became an illusion when tomorrow was as real as today. The mirror's last recorded viewing took place in 1537, when Cosimo Ferrante Medici, newly installed as Duke of Florence, decided to consult the mirror about his reign's future. What he saw there was never documented, but immediately after his viewing, Cosimo ordered the mirror sealed in a lead-lined chamber, deep beneath the Medici palace. Some knowledge, he declared, is too dangerous for any man to possess, even those who rule. The chamber was sealed with the personal seals of 3 Medici dukes, and according to family records, was never to be opened again. The mirror remained there for nearly 2 centuries, its prophetic surface reflecting only darkness and stone. But our story doesn't end there. In 1743, during renovation of the palace foundations, workers discovered the sealed chamber. The lead lining had corroded, and the mirror was gone. Only a perfect mirror-shaped outline remained on the wall, etched in silver that seemed to move and shimmer, even in complete darkness. Where did the Medici mirror go? Some say it found its way to other noble houses, continuing to show futures to those brave enough to look. Others believe it shattered under the weight of too many tomorrows, its fragments scattered across Europe, each piece carrying a splinter of prophetic power. And so concludes our second tale from the Forbidden Gallery, the story of a mirror that reflected not faces but fates, not present but future, not what was but what would be. As you drift deeper into peaceful sleep, carry with you the image of that impossible surface, where artistry met destiny, and where the future cast shadows backward through time. As the night deepens and your rest becomes more profound, we venture now into the mists of ancient Greece, where marble breathed and bronze bled tears. Here, in a forgotten sanctuary to a goddess whose name has been lost to time, stands our third forbidden masterpiece, a sculpture so lifelike that even other artists refuse to acknowledge its existence. Let your mind drift back 24 centuries to a hillside overlooking the azure Aegean Sea. The year is 340 BCE, and the greatest sculptors of the ancient world gather for a competition unlike any before or since. The prize is not gold or glory, tried to create a memorial for soldiers who died defending their homeland against an invasion that history has forgotten. The competition's most promising entrant was Lysander of Corinth, a young sculptor whose previous works had already begun to blur the line between art and life. His marble figures seemed to breathe. His bronze warriors appeared ready to step from their pedestals, and his portraits captured not just the appearance of his subjects, but something deeper, something that made viewers feel as though they were looking into living souls. But Lysander harbored a secret that would have horrified his contemporaries. He had studied with the mystery cults of Orpheus, learning techniques that combined artistic skill with ancient rituals designed to bridge the gap between the physical and spiritual worlds. His tools were not just hammer and chisel, but also prayers whispered in languages older than Greek, and ceremonies performed under specific astronomical conditions. For this competition, Lysander decided to create something unprecedented, a warrior sculpture that would not merely commemorate the dead, but would actually channel their spirits, allowing them to continue their vigil over the land they had died to protect. The process began with the selection of marble, not from the famous quarries of Paros or Pentelee, but from a vein discovered in a cave that local shepherds claimed was haunted by the voices of ancient heroes. The marble itself seemed different, shot through with veins that appeared red in certain light, as if blood flowed through the stone. As you continue your sleep-learning journey, picture Lysander's workshop nestled in the grove of a forgotten sanctuary. Olive trees whisper overhead, their leaves silver in the moonlight, while below, the sculptor works by the light of oil lamps that burn not with ordinary flame, but with fire fed by herbs that grew only on battlefields where heroes had fallen. Night after night, Lysander chiseled away at the marble, but his technique was unlike anything taught in the sculptor's schools. He worked in a trance-like state, his movements guided by dreams, in which the spirits of fallen warriors whispered instructions. The sculpture took shape not through conscious design, but through what Lysander described as divine collaboration. The warrior emerged from the marble as if he had always been there, simply waiting for the surrounding stone to be carved away. Standing 7 feet tall, he wore the armor of a hoplite, his shield bearing symbols that predated any known Greek military insignia. His face was neither idealized nor specific, but somehow universal, as if he represented every soldier who had ever died far from home. But it was the warrior's eyes that set this sculpture apart from all others. They were carved with a precision that defied explanation, but more than that, they seemed to track movement, to follow viewers as they walked around the statue. The iris was carved in such detail that individual lines were visible, and in the center, the pupil appeared to dilate and contract based on the light. When Lysander finally unveiled his creation at the competition, the reaction was immediate and unprecedented. Grown men wept openly, claiming they saw their fallen brothers in the warrior's face. Veterans of distant battles swore they heard the familiar sound of bronze on bronze, the clash of ancient combat. Some observers had to be physically restrained from rushing forward to embrace what they believed was a living soldier. But it was what happened next that earned the weeping warrior its place in our forbidden collection. As the judges approached to examine the sculpture more closely, they noticed moisture on the warrior's cheeks, not the condensation that might naturally form on cool marble, but what appeared to be actual tears, warm to the touch and salty to the taste. The warrior weeps for his fallen comrades, whispered the high priest, who served as head judge. This is no mere sculpture. This is a doorway between worlds. The other competitors immediately withdrew from the contest, claiming that Lysander had cheated by using divine intervention rather than pure artistic skill. But the judges were faced with a dilemma. How do you judge a work of art that has transcended art entirely? As your sleep deepens, let these impossible images flow through your consciousness. The marble warrior whose tears are real, the artist who spoke with spirits, the ancient world where art and magic were not separate disciplines, but different aspects of the same divine craft. The competition's conclusion was unlike any in recorded history. Lysander was declared the winner, but his prize came with conditions. The weeping warrior could never be displayed publicly, for fear that its power might be misused. Instead, it was to be housed in a special sanctuary, visited only by those who had lost loved ones in battle and needed to feel their presence one more time. The sanctuary built for the weeping warrior became a place of pilgrimage for grieving families across the Greek world. They came seeking closure, seeking peace, seeking some sign that their fallen heroes lived on in a realm beyond mortal understanding. And according to the testimonies recorded by the sanctuary's priests, they found what they sought. Mothers claimed to feel their sons' arms around them as they stood before the statue. Widows heard their husbands' voices, whispering comfort in the gentle Mediterranean breeze. Children who had never known their fathers left the sanctuary with memories of warm embraces and bedtime stories they couldn't have learned from anyone else. But the weeping warrior's power extended beyond providing comfort to the grieving. Veterans of Alexander's campaigns reported that the statue sometimes showed them visions of future battles, allowing them to prepare for conflicts that had not yet begun. Military strategists consulted the warrior before major campaigns, claiming that its tears would flow more freely when victory was unlikely, warning them to reconsider their plans. This intersection of art history and prophecy, of sculpture and spirit, represents everything that makes sleep learning so fascinating. As you rest, your mind can accept these possibilities that your waking consciousness might reject, allowing you to understand history not just as facts and dates, but as a living tapestry of human experience and divine mystery. The statue's influence on subsequent art was immeasurable. Sculptors from across the Mediterranean world made pilgrimages to study Lysander's technique, though none could replicate his results. They could create beautiful sculptures, even masterpieces, but none achieved the living quality that made the weeping warrior seem more human than human. Some attempted to copy not just Lysander's artistic methods, but his spiritual practices as well. These experiments typically ended in disaster. Sculptors found themselves trapped in their own creations, their spirits bound to marble and bronze, conscious but unable to communicate with the living world. Their workshops became places of unexplained sounds and moving shadows, avoided by apprentices who claimed to hear their masters' voices calling from within the stone. The most famous of these failed attempts was by Praxiteles, who created a figure of Aphrodite that was so lifelike it was said to inspire obsessive love in all who viewed it. But unlike Lysander's compassionate warrior, Praxiteles' creation inspired destructive passion. The statue was eventually destroyed after several viewers died attempting to court what they believed was a living goddess. The weeping warrior's fate during the Roman conquest of Greece remains one of Arthur Story's greatest mysteries. When Roman legions reached the sanctuary in 146 BCE, they found the building intact but empty. The massive statue, which would have required dozens of men and special equipment to move, had simply vanished. The only clue was found carved into the sanctuary's altar, a single line in ancient Greek that translated roughly as, "When wars end, warriors rest." Below this message was a perfect handprint, pressed into the solid marble, as if the stone had been soft clay when the print was made. Roman historians recorded that the sanctuary continued to attract visitors for several decades after the statue's disappearance. Pilgrims claimed they could still feel the warrior's presence, still see the glimmer of tears on cheeks that were no longer there. The area remained sacred ground, even without its physical centerpiece. But perhaps the weeping warrior's greatest mystery is not where it went, but why it chose to leave. Lysander's own writings, discovered centuries later in a sealed chamber beneath the sanctuary, suggest that the sculpture was never meant to be permanent. It was, in his words, a bridge between worlds, meant to serve only until the living learned to honor the dead without needing to see them. The sculptor believed that his creation would fade from the physical world once humanity had evolved beyond the need for such tangible connections to the spiritual realm. The warrior's disappearance might therefore represent not a loss, but a graduation, a sign that the ancient Greeks had finally learned to carry their heroes in their hearts, rather than needing to see them in stone. As this chapter of our Midnight Museum tour draws to a close, let the image of the weeping warrior accompany you into deeper sleep, a guardian carved from stone, but animated by love, tears that bridge the gap between life and death, and an artist who understood that the greatest sculptures are not those that capture the body, but those that free the soul. Rest now, and dream of marble that breathes, bronze that bleeds, and art that transcends the boundaries between worlds. The weeping warrior stands eternal vigil, not in any museum you can visit, but in the realm where all true art ultimately resides, in the human heart that refuses to let beauty die. Deep in your peaceful slumber now, we journey to medieval Baghdad, jewel of the Islamic Golden Age, where science and art dance together under desert stars. Here, in the year 1147, during the reign of the Abbasid Caliph al-Muqtafi, we encounter our fourth forbidden masterpiece, a set of pigments that painted not what was, but what would be. Let your sleeping mind drift along the banks of the Tigris River, past minarets that pierce the dawn sky like prayers made manifest. In the House of Wisdom, where scholars from across the known world gather to preserve and expand human knowledge. An artist named Hakim ibn Yusuf al-Baghdadi was about to create something that would blur the line between artistry and prophecy forever. Hakim was not merely a painter, but a scholar of optics, alchemy, and what medieval texts called the hidden properties of color. He had spent decades studying how different pigments affected human perception, how certain combinations could induce visions, and how the very act of mixing colors might open doorways to times yet to come. His workshop, tucked away in a corner of Baghdad's artisan quarter, was part laboratory, part studio, part mystical sanctuary. Here, surrounded by treatises on mathematics, astronomy, and the secrets of light, Hakim began his greatest experiment, the creation of pigments that would allow him to paint scenes from the future with the same accuracy that others painted the present. The process began with a journey that took Hakim across the known world to the mountains of Afghanistan, where he gathered lapis lazuli under the light of specific constellations, to the shores of the Red Sea, where he collected rare shells that had been exposed to 7 different lunar cycles, to the ruins of ancient Babylon, where he scraped dust from walls that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. But these physical ingredients were only the beginning. Each pigment required not just rare materials, but specific conditions for its creation. The ultramarine had to be ground during eclipses, when the moon's shadow fell across the earth. The vermilion needed to be mixed, while desert winds carried the prayers of pilgrims, making Hajj to Mecca. The gold leaf was prepared using techniques learned from manuscripts that claimed to preserve the wisdom of pre-flood civilizations. As you continue your sleep-learning journey through art history, picture Hakim's laboratory during those crucial months of preparation. Mortars and pestles worn smooth by generations of use, glass vessels that caught and concentrated starlight, and everywhere the subtle glow of pigments that seemed to hold light within themselves, rather than merely reflecting it. The creation of each color required not just precise measurements and timing, but also spiritual preparation. Hakim fasted for prescribed periods, meditated on specific geometric patterns, and recited prayers in languages so ancient that their meaning had been lost to all but the most dedicated scholars. When the pigments were finally ready, they bore no resemblance to ordinary paints. The blue shimmered like deep water under moonlight, seeming to contain depths that extended far beyond the physical vessel. The red pulsed with its own rhythm, like blood flowing through invisible veins. The gold appeared liquid even when solid, flowing and reforming in patterns that followed no earthly logic. Hakim's first test of his prophet's palette came on a night when all the stars aligned in a pattern that occurred only once every 847 years. He prepared a simple canvas and began to paint without any preconceived subject, allowing the pigments themselves to guide his brush. What emerged was not a scene from his own time, but a vision of Baghdad centuries in the future. Streets he had never seen, filled with people wearing clothes of unfamiliar design. Buildings that rose higher than any structure in his world, their surfaces gleaming with materials that seemed to capture and reflect sunlight in impossible ways. But most disturbing of all, in the center of this future Baghdad, Hakim painted a great library burning, its flames reaching toward a sky filled with strange flying vessels that rained fire from above. Scholars fled through streets filled with smoke, clutching scrolls and codices, trying desperately to preserve knowledge that took centuries to accumulate. I paint what I do not understand, Hakim wrote in his journal. The pigments show me tomorrow's sorrows painted in today's hope. Is this gift or curse, vision or madness? The accuracy of Hakim's painted prophecies became legendary throughout the Islamic world. He painted the arrival of the Mongol invasions decades before Hulagu Khan was born. His canvases showed the rise and fall of dynasties, the outcomes of battles that had not yet been fought, the faces of rulers who would not be born for generations. But like all the artifacts in our Midnight Museum's forbidden collection, the prophet's palette came with a terrible price. Each vision Hakim painted aged him rapidly, as if the act of seeing the future consumed years of his own life. His hair turned white after painting the fall of Baghdad to the Mongols. His hands trembled like those of an ancient man after depicting the Crusades' end. Most disturbing of all, Hakim began appearing in his own paintings, always as an old man warning future generations about disasters they could not prevent. These self-portraits showed him with eyes that held the weight of centuries, standing in ruins of cities that still thrived in his present day, holding brushes that dripped with tears instead of paint. Word of the prophet's palette reached the caliph's court, where scholars debated whether such power was divine gift or demonic temptation. Some argued that knowledge of the future was God's alone, and that Hakim's pigments violated cosmic law. Others claimed that his visions could help prevent the disasters they depicted, that forewarning was itself a form of divine mercy. The debate was settled by Hakim himself, who painted one final vision that terrified even his supporters. The canvas showed the prophet's palette itself, but corrupted, its colors turned to poison that killed everyone who viewed the paintings created with them. In this final prophecy, Hakim saw his own creation becoming a weapon used by tyrants to control their subjects through fear of a future only the rulers could see. I have created something that transcends art, he wrote in his final journal entry. But transcendence without wisdom is merely destruction wearing beautiful clothes. The future belongs to those who live it, not to those who paint it. On the night of the autumn equinox in 1158, Hakim carefully gathered all the pigments he had created over more than a decade of work. One by one, he poured them into a crucible made from meteoric iron, mixing them as the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. The reaction was visible from miles away. Witnesses reported. A column of multicolored light rose from Hakim's workshop, spiraling into the night sky like a rainbow made of fire. When dawn came, the building was intact, but empty. Hakim was gone, and with him, every trace of the prophet's palette. The only evidence of their existence was found painted on the workshop's walls. A mural showing Hakim himself stepping through what appeared to be a doorway made of swirling colors, his hand raised in farewell, his face peaceful for the first time in years. But the story of the prophet's palette didn't end with Hakim's disappearance. Throughout the following centuries, travelers reported finding small caches of unusual pigments hidden in ruins across the former Islamic Empire. These remnants possessed diluted versions of the original pigment's power, allowing artists to paint scenes from the immediate future with limited accuracy. These secondary palettes found their way into the hands of artists across Europe, Asia, and Africa, each carrying a fragment of Hakim's impossible vision. Renaissance painters used traces of the prophet's blue to add depth to their skies that seemed to hold tomorrow's weather. Chinese scroll painters incorporated whispers of the sacred vermilion to create landscapes that showed the changing seasons decades in advance. The influence of these diluted pigments can be traced through Arthur's story, like golden threads woven through a vast tapestry. Every painting that seems to capture not just a moment, but a movement. Every portrait that reveals character traits the subject had not yet developed. Every landscape that shows the promise hidden in seemingly barren ground. All carry echoes of Hakim's great work. As this chapter of our sleep learning journey draws to a close, let the story of the prophet's palette settle into your resting consciousness, like sediment in still water. Here was an artist who reached beyond the boundaries of his own time, who transformed the very nature of creation from recording what was to revealing what would be. Rest now with the image of that Baghdad workshop, where science and spirituality merged in service of art, where an alchemist painter discovered that the future has its own colors, visible only to those brave enough to look beyond the present moment's limitations. In your dreams, perhaps you too will glimpse tomorrow, painted in pigments that exist only in the realm between sleeping and waking, between what is and what might yet come to pass. As the deepest part of night embraces your slumber, we travel now to Imperial China during the Ming Dynasty's golden age, where art served not just beauty, but power itself. In the Forbidden City of 1421, during the reign of the Yongle Emperor, we discover our fifth forbidden masterpiece, a painting that captured not the emperor's image, but his very essence, with consequences that would echo through centuries. Let your dreaming mind drift along the Grand Canal, past pagodas reflected in still water, toward the red walls and golden roofs of Beijing's most sacred spaces. Here, in a workshop that officially didn't exist, court painter Zhang Wuyu was about to create the most dangerous artwork in Chinese history. Zhang Wuyu was already legendary for his portraits that seemed to breathe with life. His painted emperors appeared more imperial than the flesh and blood rulers who sat for them. His court ladies possessed beauty that made real noblewomen weep with envy. But the Yongle Emperor demanded something unprecedented, a portrait that would allow him to rule even after death, his painted image holding the same authority as his living presence. The commission was given in secret, known only to Zhang Wuyu, the emperor, and a handful of trusted eunuchs who had sworn blood oaths of silence. The painting was to be created using techniques that predated written history, methods passed down through generations of court artists who served not just as creators, but as guardians of imperial power itself. Zhang Wuyu began his preparation by studying not just the emperor's physical appearance, but his Qi, the life force that Chinese philosophy taught flowed through all living beings. For 49 days, he observed the emperor during court ceremonies, private moments, times of decision and rest. learning to see the invisible energy that made Yongli not just a man, but the son of heaven. The canvas itself was woven from silk, produced by silkworms, fed exclusively on mulberry leaves that had been blessed by Taoist monks. The frame was carved from wood, taken from trees that had grown in the shadow of the Great Wall, absorbing centuries of imperial history into their grain. Even the studio where Zhang worked was purified according to ancient rituals, its walls painted with protective symbols that were old when Confucius was young. But it was the pigments that made this portrait truly extraordinary. Zhang Wuyu spent months creating colors that had never before existed in earthly art. The imperial yellow was mixed with gold dust, taken from the emperor's own ceremonial robes, ground so fine it remained suspended in the paint, like captured sunlight. The ink for the emperor's hair incorporated soot from incense burned during the dynasty's founding ceremonies, carrying the spiritual weight of imperial legitimacy itself. As you continue your sleep-learning exploration of artistry, picture that hidden workshop deep within the Forbidden City. Lacquered screens filter the light into geometric patterns, while the artist works by the glow of jade lamps that burn oil perfumed with rare spices from the tribute fleets. The very air seems thick with history, with the accumulated power of 5,000 years of imperial rule. The painting process required not just artistic skill, but spiritual discipline that bordered on the mystical. Zhang Wuyu painted only during hours determined by court astronomers, when the celestial influences aligned to strengthen rather than diminish imperial power. Each brushstroke was preceded by meditation, each color applied according to formulas that treated painting not as mere representation, but as a form of magical creation. As the portrait took shape, something unprecedented began to happen. The painted emperor seemed to develop a will of its own, independent of the artist's conscious intention. Zhang Wuyu found himself painting details he had never observed, adding elements to the composition that felt necessary, despite having no basis in his reference observations. The emperor's painted eyes followed viewers with an intensity that made even hardened court officials uncomfortable. His painted mouth seemed to move slightly, as if imperial words were forming just below the threshold of sound. Most disturbing of all, the portrait appeared to age at the same rate as the living emperor, gaining wrinkles and gray hairs that Zhang Wuyu swore he had never painted. "I no longer paint the emperor," Zhang Wuyu confided to his private journal. "The emperor paints himself through my hand. I am merely the vessel through which his essence flows onto silk." When the portrait was finally completed, the reaction was immediate and terrifying. The Yongle emperor stood before his painted image and saw not a representation, but a reflection, as if he were looking into a mirror that showed not just appearance, but soul. For long minutes, emperor and painting stared at each other in silent communication, two aspects of the same being recognizing their fundamental unity. But the portrait's true power revealed itself only after the emperor's death in 1424. Court officials discovered that the painting continued to function as if the emperor still lived. When approached with questions of state policy, the painted eyes would shift direction, indicating approval or disapproval of proposed actions. During times of crisis, the portrait would seem to glow with inner light, providing guidance to confused ministers and generals. The new emperor, Yongli's son, Hongxi, found himself ruling not alone, but in consultation with his father's painted essence. Major decisions required approval from both the living ruler and the painted predecessor, creating a form of government that transcended death itself. This supernatural continuation of imperial power is what makes this tale so compelling for sleep learning. As your conscious mind rests, your deeper awareness can appreciate the profound questions raised by art that bridges life and death, by creativity that transcends the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds. For 3 years, the painted emperor ruled alongside his living son, providing wisdom gained from experiences beyond mortal understanding. The Ming dynasty flourished as never before, its policies guided by the combined perspective of earthly governance and otherworldly insight. But such power inevitably attracted corruption. Court officials began competing for the painted emperor's favor, believing that approval from the portrait could override decisions made by the living ruler. Factions formed around different interpretations of the painting's subtle signs, leading to conflicts that threatened the very stability the portrait was meant to preserve. The crisis came to a head when the painting began showing signs of its own mortality. The painted emperor's face grew gaunt, his eyes dimmed, and his imperial robes appeared to fade and tatter, despite the physical painting remaining perfectly preserved. Zhang Wuyu, now an old man himself, was summoned to explain this impossible deterioration. Even painted souls must eventually find rest, the artist explained to the horrified court. The portrait has served its purpose, bridging the gap between one reign and the next. But now it grows weary of earthly concerns and seeks to join the ancestors in their eternal palace. Emperor Hongxi faced an impossible choice: allow the portrait to fade and lose his father's supernatural guidance, or find a way to preserve it at unknown cost. The decision was made for him when the painting began to speak directly, its painted lips moving to form words that only the emperor could hear. What the painted emperor revealed in those final conversations was never recorded in any official history, but the effect was immediate and dramatic. Hongxi ordered the portrait sealed in a chamber deep beneath the Forbidden City, guarded by monks who had taken vows of absolute silence and blindness, ensuring they could neither reveal the painting's location nor be influenced by its power. Some authority, Hongxi declared, is too great for any single man to wield, whether living or painted. My father's wisdom must rest with his body, leaving the living to govern the world of the living. The sealed chamber was marked only with a single character carved into the stone floor: sleep. The monks who guarded it were replaced every 7 years, always chosen from monasteries so remote they had no knowledge of court politics or imperial history. This supernatural continuation of imperial power is what makes this tale so compelling for sleep learning. As your conscious mind rests, your deeper awareness can appreciate the profound questions raised by art that bridges life and death, by creativity that transcends the boundaries between the physical and spiritual worlds. For 3 years, the painted emperor ruled alongside his living son, providing wisdom gained from experiences beyond mortal understanding. The Ming Dynasty flourished as never before, its policies guided by the combined perspective of earthly governance and otherworldly insight. But such power inevitably attracted corruption. Court officials began competing for the painted emperor's favor, believing that approval from the portrait could override decisions made by the living ruler. Factions formed around different interpretations of the painting's subtle signs, leading to conflicts that threatened the very stability the portrait was meant to preserve. The crisis came to a head when the painting began showing signs of its own mortality. The painted emperor's face grew gaunt, his eyes dimmed, and his imperial robes appeared to fade and tatter, despite the physical painting remaining perfectly preserved. Zhang Wuyu, now an old man himself, was summoned to explain this impossible deterioration. Even painted souls must eventually find rest, the artist explained to the horrified court. The portrait has served its purpose, bridging the gap between one reign and the next. But now it grows weary of earthly concerns and seeks to join the ancestors in their eternal palace. Emperor Hongxi faced an impossible choice: allow the portrait to fade and lose his father's supernatural guidance, or find a way to preserve it at unknown cost. The decision was made for him when the painting began to speak directly, its painted lips moving to form words that only the emperor could hear. What the painted emperor revealed in those final conversations was never recorded in any official history, but the effect was immediate and dramatic. Hongxi ordered the portrait sealed in a chamber deep beneath the Forbidden City, guarded by monks who had taken vows of absolute silence and blindness, ensuring they could neither reveal the painting's location nor be influenced by its power. Some authority, Hongxi declared, is too great for any single man to wield, whether living or painted. My father's wisdom must rest with his body, leaving the living to govern the world of the living. The sealed chamber was marked only with a single character carved into the stone floor: sleep. The monks who guarded it were replaced every 7 years, always chosen from monasteries so remote they had no knowledge of court politics or imperial history. But sealing the emperor's shadow, as court whispers came to call it, didn't end its influence on Chinese art history. Painters throughout the Ming and Qing dynasties sought to recreate Zhang Wuyu's techniques, hoping to create portraits with even a fraction of the original's power. These attempts typically resulted in paintings that possessed disturbing qualities without the original's benevolent purpose. Portraits that aged rapidly, showing their subjects' deaths decades before they occurred. Images that seemed to drain life from their viewers, growing more vibrant as those who looked upon them grew pale and weak. Court ladies who posed for such portraits often found themselves trapped in eternal youth, while their painted images grew old in their place. The most successful attempt to recreate the emperor's shadow was made during the Qing dynasty by court painter Giuseppe Castiglione, an Italian Jesuit who had studied both European and Chinese techniques. His portrait of the Qianlong Emperor possessed many of the original's qualities, but lacked the spiritual foundation that had made Zhang Wuyu's work both powerful and ultimately controllable. Castiglione's painted emperor began showing signs of independence within days of its completion, making decisions that contradicted the living ruler's wishes and gradually asserting dominance over court proceedings. The situation became so dire that the portrait had to be destroyed, but even burning couldn't completely eliminate its influence. Witnesses reported that the painted emperor's voice continued to echo through the Forbidden City for months afterward, growing fainter but never completely silent. As we conclude this chapter of our Midnight Museum tour, let the image of the Emperor's shadow accompany you into even deeper sleep. Here was art that transcended mere representation to become a form of immortality, creativity that bridged the gap between earthly power and eternal authority. Rest now with the vision of that hidden chamber beneath the Forbidden City, where a painted emperor sleeps in darkness. His impossible reign finally ended, but his essence preserved in silk and pigment, waiting perhaps for a time when the world might again need guidance from beyond the veil of death. In your dreams, perhaps, you'll glimpse those painted eyes that held the wisdom of centuries. Understand the weight of authority that transcends physical existence, and appreciate the delicate balance between power and responsibility that even the greatest art cannot fully resolve.
The painting is transformation. Every moment it exists, it teaches the universe new ways to become itself. This concept of art, as active participant in cosmic evolution, represents one of the most profound ideas in all of art history. Perfect for contemplation during sleep learning, when your mind is most open to possibilities that transcend ordinary logic. The canvas reached its full power during the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in 1603, an astrological event that occurs only every 20 years. The laboratory filled with impossible colors, scents that had no earthly source, and sounds like crystal singing in harmonies that made listeners weep with joy. Emperor Rudolph emerged speaking of abdication, claiming that earthly rule was meaningless compared to the cosmic responsibilities the painting had revealed. Mordecai himself appeared decades younger, as if the knight's transformations had reversed the normal flow of time within his body. But like all the artifacts in our Midnight Museum's Forbidden's collection, the alchemist's canvas carried a price that became clear only with time. The liquid elements that comprised the painting's medium were too powerful to remain stable indefinitely. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to transform not just themselves, but everything around them. The tower laboratory started changing, its stone walls taking on metallic properties, its wooden floors becoming crystalline, its glass vessels turning into substances that had no names in any earthly language. The transformation spread downward through the castle itself, threatening to convert the entire structure into something that existed between the physical and spiritual worlds. Recognizing the danger, Mordecai made the most difficult decision of his life. The containment ritual took 3 days and nights, during which Mordecai systematically reversed every transformation the painting had undergone, guiding its liquid elements back to their stable forms, while capturing their essence in a series of crystal matrices that could hold the knowledge without the dangerous power. But no longer alive, its transformative power safely contained within crystalline structures that Mordecai sealed in lead-lined boxes and scattered across Europe. These crystal matrices, each no larger than a child's fist, contained fragments of the painting's impossible knowledge. One crystal matrix reached Sir Isaac Newton, inspiring his investigations into the mathematical laws that governed physical transformation. Another found its way to the young Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, influencing his theory of colors and his understanding of the relationship between art and science. A third crystal was acquired by the mysterious Count of Saint Germain, who claimed it allowed him to achieve the physical immortality that made him legendary throughout the 18th century. Here was art that transcended representation to become participation in the fundamental processes of creation itself. Here was art that transcended representation to become participation in the fundamental processes of creation itself. Understand the profound responsibility that comes with the power.
Burning with cold flame that gave heat without consuming. His gold was not mere golden pigment, but philosophical gold, the perfected metal that alchemists claimed was incorruptible and eternal. As you continue your sleep-learning journey through art history's most mysterious chapters, picture Mordecai's laboratory during those crucial months of preparation. Glass vessels of impossible shapes contained swirling liquids that seemed to move with their own purpose. Furnaces burned with flames of every color, their heat carefully regulated according to formulas that had been whispered through generations of secretive practitioners. The actual painting process began only after 2 years of preparation, on the night of a total solar eclipse when all the elements aligned in perfect harmony. Mordecai worked not with brushes, but with instruments of his own design, tools that could handle substances too volatile for ordinary materials. As he painted, the canvas itself began to respond, not merely accepting the liquid elements, but interacting with them, catalyzing reactions that created new colors, new textures, new possibilities that existed nowhere else in nature. The painting seemed to paint itself, with Mordecai serving as guide rather than creator, directing forces that were ultimately beyond any single person's control. What emerged was not a static image, but a living process, a visual representation of transformation itself. The painting showed the classical elements, earth, air, fire, and water, but not as they appeared in nature. Instead, it depicted them in their pure philosophical forms, the spiritual essences that underlay all material manifestation. But most remarkably, the painting changed based on who was viewing it and when. During spring, observers saw processes of growth and renewal, with the painted elements combining to create new forms of life. In summer, the emphasis shifted to maturation and perfection, the elements achieving balance and harmony. Autumn brought visions of harvest and wisdom, while winter showed the necessary dissolution that preceded rebirth. Individual viewers saw different aspects based on their own spiritual development. Novices in the alchemical arts saw only beautiful but incomprehensible swirls of color. Adepts recognized specific processes and transformations they had studied in their theoretical work. Masters saw the deepest mysteries, the ultimate secrets that could transform not just metals, but consciousness itself. Emperor Rudolph spent hours studying the alchemist's canvas, claiming that it revealed to him the true nature of imperial power as a form of spiritual transmutation. I thought I ruled over people and territories, he confided to his private journal. But this painting shows me that a true emperor rules over the elements themselves, guiding a transformation rather than merely commanding obedience. The painting's influence extended far beyond individual revelation. Alchemists from across Europe made pilgrimages to Prague, hoping to learn from a work that seemed to demonstrate principles they had only theorized about. But viewing the canvas was dangerous for those unprepared for its revelations. Several observers suffered what contemporary accounts described as philosophical fever, a condition where exposure to too much alchemical truth caused temporary madness. They would speak in languages that seemed to be composed entirely of chemical formulas, draw diagrams of impossible geometric forms, and claim to see the mathematical structures underlying all physical reality. One visitor, a young alchemist named Heinrich Kunrath, spent only 10 minutes viewing the canvas before collapsing in convulsions. When he recovered 3 days later, he had completely forgotten his native German, but could speak fluently in what appeared to be the language of the elements themselves, describing chemical processes that wouldn't be discovered by conventional science for another 2 centuries. The painting doesn't show transformation, Kunrath explained through an interpreter. The painting is transformation. Every moment it exists, it teaches the universe new ways to become itself. This concept of art as active participant in cosmic evolution represents one of the most profound ideas in all of art history, perfect for contemplation. During sleep learning, when your mind is most open to possibilities that transcend ordinary logic, the canvas reached its full power during the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in 1603, an astrological event that occurs only every 20 years. On that night, observers reported that the painting became three-dimensional, its liquid elements appearing to flow out of the canvas and into the surrounding space. The laboratory filled with impossible colors, scents that had no earthly source, and sounds like crystals singing in harmonies that made listeners weep with joy. For 6 hours, the boundary between the painted work and physical reality completely dissolved, creating a space where thought became substance and intention, manifested as immediate transformation. When dawn broke, the painting had returned to its normal two-dimensional state. But everyone who had witnessed the night's events was fundamentally changed. Emperor Rudolph emerged speaking of abdication, claiming that earthly rule was meaningless compared to the cosmic responsibilities the painting had revealed. Mordecai himself appeared decades younger, as if the night's transformations had reversed the normal flow of time within his body. But like all the artifacts in our Midnight Museum's forbidden collection, the alchemist's canvas carried a price that became clear only with the time. The liquid elements that comprised the painting's medium were too powerful to remain stable indefinitely. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to transform not just themselves, but everything around them. The tower laboratory started changing, its stone walls taking on metallic properties, its wooden floors becoming crystalline, its glass vessels turning into substances that had no names in any earthly language. The transformation spread downward through the castle itself, threatening to convert the entire structure into something that existed between the physical and spiritual worlds. Recognizing the danger, Mordecai made the most difficult decision of his life. On the winter solstice of 1611, he began the process of containing the painting's transformative power, using techniques that would necessarily destroy the work while preserving its essential knowledge for future generations. The containment ritual took 3 days and nights, during which Mordecai systematically reversed every transformation the painting had undergone, guiding its liquid elements back to their stable forms, while capturing their essence in a series of crystal matrices that could hold the knowledge without the dangerous power. When the process was complete, the alchemist's canvas had become an ordinary painting, beautiful, but no longer alive. Its transformative power safely contained within crystalline structures that Mordecai sealed in lead-lined boxes and scattered across Europe. These crystal matrices, each no larger than a child's fist, contained fragments of the painting's impossible knowledge. They found their way into the hands of alchemists, artists, and philosophers who used them to advance human understanding in ways that seemed miraculous to their contemporaries. One crystal matrix reached Sir Isaac Newton, inspiring his investigations into the mathematical laws that governed physical transformation. Another found its way to the young Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, influencing his theory of colors and his understanding of the relationship between art and science. A third crystal was acquired by the mysterious Count of Saint-Germain, who claimed it allowed him to achieve the physical immortality that made him legendary throughout the 18th century. As this chapter of our sleep-learning journey through forbidden art history draws to a close, let the vision of the alchemist's canvas settle into your deepest consciousness. Here was art that transcended representation to become participation in the fundamental processes of creation itself. Rest now with the image of that Prague laboratory where science and spirituality merged in pursuit of ultimate truth, becoming catalysts for change that extends far beyond the boundaries of any single canvas. As the night reaches its deepest point and your sleep becomes most profound, we journey now into the hidden chambers beneath the Vatican, where art serves not just the glory of God, but the mysteries that lie beyond human comprehension. In the year 1503, while Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel above, a forgotten artist created something far more dangerous. In the forgotten spaces below, let your dreaming mind descend through secret passages that wind beneath St. Peter's Basilica, past crypts where saints sleep their eternal sleep, into chambers that predate Christianity itself, built upon the foundations of temples that honored older gods, older mysteries, older truths about the nature of divine inspiration. Brother Antonius of Padua was not supposed to exist according to Vatican records. His name appears in no official registry. His work is mentioned in no contemporary accounts. And yet, the evidence of his presence remains hidden in places where only the most trusted servants of the Church are permitted to venture. Antonius was a Dominican friar who had studied not just theology, but the mystical traditions that Christianity had absorbed from earlier sources. He understood that divine inspiration could take forms that challenged orthodox interpretation, that the Holy Spirit might speak through images that disturbed as much as they comforted. His commission came not from any pope or cardinal, but from a secret brotherhood within the Church that traced its origins to the earliest Christian communities. These men, known only as the Custodes Visionis, the guardians of vision, believed that certain truths were too profound for ordinary believers, requiring artistic expression that could only be safely viewed by those spiritually prepared for revelation. The chamber chosen for Antonius's work lay 3 levels beneath the main basilica, carved from living rock by unknown hands in an age when Rome was young. The walls were already covered with frescoes from various periods, pagan imagery that told stories of gods who died and were reborn, of journeys through underworlds, of visions that bridged the gap between human consciousness and divine reality. Antonius's task was to create a fresco that would synthesize all these traditions, showing the common thread that connected humanity's search for transcendence across cultures and centuries. But his vision extended beyond mere synthesis. He sought to create art that would actually induce the mystical experiences it depicted, transforming viewers from observers into participants in the divine drama. The pigments Antonius used were prepared according to formulas that had been secretly preserved since the days of the early church fathers. His blues contained ground lapis lazuli that had been blessed by hermits living in the Egyptian desert, men who claimed direct spiritual descent from the desert fathers who had first established Christian monasticism. His reds incorporated cinnabar that had been extracted from caves where martyrs had hidden during the Roman persecutions, earth that had been consecrated by the blood of those who died for their faith. His gold leaf was prepared using techniques learned from Byzantine icon painters, who claimed their methods had been revealed to them in visions of the celestial city itself. But most remarkable of all were the whites, created from calcite that had formed in the catacombs, where the earliest Christians buried their dead. This pigment seemed to glow with its own light, as if the spiritual radiance of the saints had been captured and transformed into paintable form. As you continue your sleep-learning exploration of art history's most hidden chapters, picture Brother Antonius working alone in that underground chamber, illuminated only by oil lamps that burned with flames that never flickered, their light steady as the eternal truths he sought to capture on stone. The fresco that emerged over months of careful work defied every convention of religious art. Instead of depicting specific biblical scenes, Antonius painted the experience of divine encounter itself, figures that seemed to be formed from pure light, interacted with beings of shadow and substance, creating compositions that appeared to move and shift depending on the angle of observation. The central image showed what appeared to be the moment of creation, but not as described in Genesis. Instead, Antonius depicted creation as an ongoing process, with divine consciousness continuously manifesting reality through acts of cosmic imagination. Angels weren't separate beings, but aspects of a single divine mind, thinking itself into existence through infinite forms of beauty. Surrounding this central vision were smaller scenes that showed the same creative process manifesting in human consciousness. Saints and mystics from various traditions were depicted in moments of ecstasy, their individual consciousness merging with the universal source that Antonius painted as a luminous void containing all possibilities. But the most disturbing aspect of the fresco was its treatment of evil and suffering. Instead of depicting these as separate from divine will, Antonius showed them as necessary, shadows cast by infinite light, dark spaces that gave definition and meaning to illumination, suffering that served as the catalyst for spiritual growth. God dreams, read the inscription Antonius carved in Latin around the chamber's entrance, and in dreaming experiences every joy and every sorrow, every birth and every death, every love and every loss. We are the content of divine dreams, and our purpose is to help God wake up to his own infinite nature. This theological position was dangerously close to heresy, suggesting that God was not complete, but evolving, not perfect, but learning through the experiences of his creations. Yet the fresco presented this radical vision with such beauty and spiritual power that even the most orthodox viewers found themselves unable to dismiss it entirely. The first official viewing took place in 1504, when Pope Julius II descended into the hidden chamber, accompanied by 3 cardinals and the head of the Dominican order. What happened during that viewing was never recorded in any official document, but the effect was immediate and profound. Julius emerged from the underground chamber in a state of spiritual exaltation that lasted for weeks. He spoke of having seen the face of God as it truly is, not as we wish it to be, and began making decisions that seemed guided by visions rather than political calculation. His plans for St. Peter's Basilica became more ambitious, his patronage of artists more generous, his understanding of papal authority more mystical than institutional. The cardinals who accompanied him reported similar experiences, claiming the fresco had shown them visions of their own souls as they appeared from the divine perspective. They saw their virtues not as personal achievements, but as aspects of cosmic harmony, their sins not as moral failures, but as necessary experiences in the soul's journey toward understanding. Word of the hidden fresco spread through the Vatican's inner circles, like ripples in a sacred pool. Cardinals, bishops, and prominent theologians requested private viewings, hoping to experience for themselves the spiritual revelations that others described in whispered conversations. But viewing the dreamer's fresco, as it came to be known, was not without risks. Several observers suffered what contemporary accounts described as holy madness, a condition where exposure to too much divine truth caused temporary loss of normal psychological function. These individuals would speak only in mystical poetry, claiming that ordinary language was inadequate to express the realities they had witnessed. They drew complex geometric diagrams that seemed to map invisible dimensions of spiritual space. Most disturbing of all, they claimed to see the divine presence in everything, from the most sacred relics to the most mundane objects, insisting that all material reality was equally holy, because all was equally part of God's eternal dream. One young priest, Father Michel Doriani, spent only 15 minutes viewing the fresco before collapsing in what appeared to be religious ecstasy. When he recovered 3 days later, he had completely lost the ability to distinguish between waking and sleeping consciousness, claiming that the fresco had revealed the illusory nature of such distinctions. We think we wake and sleep, Father Toriani explained to concerned colleagues, but we are always dreaming. The only question's whether we dream as separate individuals or as part of God's infinite imagination. The fresco shows us how to choose. This blurring of boundaries between individual and cosmic consciousness represents one of the most profound themes in mystical art history, perfect for contemplation during sleep learning when your own consciousness rests in that liminal space between separate selfhood and universal awareness. The fresco's influence extended far beyond individual spiritual experiences. Theologians who had viewed it began developing new interpretations of Christian doctrine that emphasized direct mystical experience over institutional authority. Artists started creating works that prioritized spiritual transformation over aesthetic beauty. Even Vatican policy began shifting toward positions that seemed informed by visions of cosmic, rather than merely earthly significance. This evolution reached its peak during the secret consistory of 1512, when Pope Julius convened a gathering of cardinals who had all viewed the dreamer's fresco. The meeting's official purpose was to discuss reforms within the church, but witnesses reported that much of the discussion focused on revelations about the nature of reality that the participants claimed to have received through their encounters with Antonius's work. The consistory's conclusions were never made public, but their influence can be traced through subsequent Vatican decisions that seemed to reflect a more mystical understanding of church mission, greater tolerance for contemplative orders, increased support for visionary saints, and a subtle shift in theological emphasis from salvation as escape from the world to salvation as deeper engagement with a divine reality. But like all the artifacts in our Midnight Museum's forbidden collection, the dreamer's fresco carried dangers that eventually outweighed its benefits. The mystical experiences it induced were too powerful for many viewers to integrate safely into normal consciousness. Reports began reaching Vatican authorities of priests who had abandoned their parishes to pursue hermetic lifestyles, claiming that ordinary pastoral duties were meaningless compared to the cosmic responsibilities the fresco had revealed. Nuns described visions so vivid that they could no longer distinguish between prayer and hallucination. Several prominent theologians developed doctrinal positions so radical that they bordered on complete rejection of church authority. The crisis came to a head in 1517, the same year Martin Luther posted his 95 Theses, when a group of cardinals who had all viewed the fresco began advocating for fundamental changes in church structure that would have eliminated the papacy entirely in favor of direct mystical democracy, guided by collective visions. Recognizing that the fresco's influence was becoming more disruptive than beneficial, Pope Leo X made the difficult decision to seal the underground chamber permanently. Brother Antonius, who had spent 14 years maintaining and occasionally adding to his masterwork, was given the opportunity to preserve his vision in portable form before the sealing took place. Working with desperate speed, Antonius created a series of small panels that captured the essence of his larger fresco, concentrating its spiritual power into formats that could be safely transported and hidden. These panels were distributed to contemplative communities across Europe, where they continued to inspire mystical experiences in controlled environments. The chamber itself was sealed, using techniques that ensured it could never be accidentally reopened. The entrance was filled with consecrated stones. The passages leading to it were deliberately collapsed, and all maps showing its location were destroyed. Only a single key remained, held by the Vatican's chief archivist, to be used only if the church faced spiritual crisis so severe that even dangerous mystical knowledge might be preferable to total spiritual darkness. As this chapter of our journey through forbidden art history draws to a close, let the vision of the dreamer's fresco accompany you into even deeper sleep. Here was art that transcended representation to become revelation, creativity that bridged the gap between human consciousness and divine reality. Rest now with the image of that hidden chamber where theology and artistry merged in service of ultimate truth, where a forgotten friar discovered that the greatest religious art doesn't just depict spiritual reality, but opens doorways through which believers can experience it directly. In your dreams, perhaps you'll glimpse that luminous void containing all possibilities. Understand the profound unity that underlies apparent diversity, and appreciate the delicate balance between revelation and preservation that defines all encounters with the sacred mysteries. In the deepest hours of your slumber, as dawn begins its distant approach, we arrive at last at the heart of the Midnight Museum, where all our forbidden stories converge in a single, impossible space that exists between dream and waking, between memory and prophecy, between what was and what might yet be. This final gallery holds not a single masterpiece, but the culmination of all we have discovered together during our journey through art history's most hidden chambers. Here, in a room that seems to exist in all times simultaneously, the cursed canvas hangs beside the Medici mirror, while the weeping warrior stands guard over the prophet's pallet. The emperor's shadow watches over the alchemist's canvas, and the dreamer's fresco illuminates them all with its impossible light. As you rest in the deepest part of your sleep-learning experience, let your consciousness drift through this ultimate sanctuary, where every forbidden work speaks to every other, where the patterns that connect all human creativity become visible, where the true purpose of art reveals itself, not as decoration or entertainment, but as humanity's greatest tool for touching the infinite. The final gallery exists not in any physical location, but in the realm of collective imagination, that space where all human dreams converge, where every story ever told continues to unfold, where every masterpiece ever created maintains its eternal life, regardless of whether its physical form survives. Here, František Kupka continues to paint prophecies that help guide humanity through its darkest hours. The Medici mirror reflects not individual futures, but the destiny of consciousness itself as it evolves toward greater wisdom and compassion. The weeping warrior sheds tears, not just for ancient battles, but for every conflict that separates human hearts from their shared source of love. Hakim ibn Yusuf al-Baghdadi's pigments continue to reveal the colors of tomorrow, showing artists across all cultures and centuries how to paint hope in times of despair. Zhang Wuyu's painted emperor offers guidance not to any single dynasty, but to all who seek to lead with wisdom rather than mere power. Mordecai ben Avram's liquid elements continue their eternal transformation, helping consciousness itself evolve toward its ultimate destination. And Brother Antonius's fresco pulses with divine light that illuminates the truth hidden within every religious tradition, that all paths lead ultimately to the same source, that all art serves ultimately the same purpose, that all consciousness participates ultimately in the same infinite creative process. The lesson of the Midnight Museum, whispered in the silence between sleep and waking, is that art has never been separate from magic. Creativity has never been distinct from spirituality, and imagination has never been anything less than humanity's most direct connection to the source of all existence. Every painting you have ever loved, every sculpture that has moved you to tears, every song that has lifted your spirit participates in this same eternal gallery. They exist simultaneously in the physical world, where they can be bought and sold, admired and critiqued, and in the realm of pure imagination where they live forever, continuing to inspire and transform anyone whose consciousness touches theirs. The forbidden masterpieces we have encountered tonight are forbidden not because they are dangerous, but because they reveal truths too profound for ordinary consciousness to contain safely. They show us that creativity is not a human invention, but a cosmic force that flows through us. That artistry is not a profession, but a form of priesthood. That imagination is not fantasy, but the fundamental process through which reality continuously creates itself. As you rest in the deepest phases of sleep learning, these truths settle into your consciousness. Like seeds planted in fertile dream soil, you will wake with a deeper appreciation for every form of artistic expression, understanding that behind every canvas, every sculpture, every song, every story, lies the same infinite source that spoke through our forbidden masters. The Midnight Museum exists wherever art is created with reverence, wherever beauty is approached as sacred, wherever imagination is honored as humanity's greatest gift. It exists in the moment when a child first picks up a crayon and discovers that inner vision can become outer reality. It exists when an elderly person sees a sunset and feels their soul expand to embrace the infinite. It exists whenever someone creates anything, however humble, with love and intention and the desire to touch something larger than themselves. Our journey through these forbidden galleries has taught us that art history is not a collection of facts about dead masters and dusty paintings, but a living river of inspiration that flows from the deepest source of existence through every human heart that remains open to wonder. As the first hints of dawn touch the horizon and your sleep learning experience draws toward its natural completion, carry these stories with you into waking consciousness. Let them remind you that every moment of creation, whether artistic or otherwise, participates in the same cosmic process that brought forth the stars and planets, mountains and oceans, and the miraculous flowering of consciousness that makes beauty possible. The Midnight Museum never closes because imagination never sleeps. Its doors remain always open to those who approach art, not as consumers but as pilgrims, not as critics but as celebrants, not as observers but as participants in the eternal dance of creation. Rest now in the knowledge that you have glimpsed the secret art of all artistic endeavor, the hidden truth that connects every brushstroke to the brushstroke of divine imagination, painting reality into existence moment by moment. Fall asleep, knowing that when you wake, you will see art everywhere, recognize beauty in the most unexpected places, and understand that your own life is itself a masterpiece in progress, painted with the same infinite love that guided every forbidden master we have encountered tonight. Sweet dreams, fellow traveler. The Midnight Museum will be here whenever you need. To remember that ordinary consciousness is just the entrance hall to palaces of wonder that exist wherever human imagination touches the infinite source of all creative possibility.